I know that this has been a long time coming. So first and foremost, I just really want to thank you for your patience. Those of you who have been waiting for this. Hello, my name is Lucy. Welcome back to my channel, and this character essay is part of a series of character essays on the Archie comics characters and how them and their relationships with others should be portrayed in Riverdale that would help dimensionalize them better while staying truer to the comics. Today in the hot seat, we have the main character of the comics and supposedly the main character of the show, Archie Andrews. I am so ready for this one. I have been looking forward to this one, just so you know. Archie Andrews debuted in the 22nd issue of the Pep Comics series in December of 1941 alongside Betty Cooper and Jughead Jones. He was created by publisher John L. Goldwater and artist Bob Montana in collaboration with writer Vic Bloom. He has orange hair, pale skin, and freckles. He's the only child of Mary and Fred Andrews. His father works as a mid-level business executive. His mother, initially a homemaker, takes a job at a real estate agency in later years. Archie lives in Riverdale, where he attends Riverdale High School. Archie is portrayed as an average American teenage boy with an average mom and an average dad living in the average town of Riverdale. The difference is, Archie has 2 girlfriends. What's more, they're always fighting over him. He is forever caught in a love triangle between the sweet girl next door, Betty, and the rich girl in the mansion, Veronica. He's always juggling the 2 girls, which keeps him in endless trouble. He's clean-cut, well-mannered, and well-meaning, but is extremely impulsive, clumsy, and easily distracted. He brings home average grades and plays on the high school sports teams. He has had assorted part-time jobs to earn date money. Outside of dating, Archie largely enjoys sports. He plays baseball, basketball, and football for the Riverdale High teams. Though often not as good an athlete as Moose Mason, Chuck Clayton, or Reggie Mantle, he proves a valuable member of the school team. Coach Cleats values him for his athletic abilities and team spirit. However, Archie's athletic abilities vary from story to story due to his frequent clumsiness. Various stories refer to him as being extremely athletic to the point of his team relying on him to win a game, while in contrast, several other stories portray him as having poor athletic ability. Several stories begin with Archie portrayed as the star QB, but unable to play due to an injury. He has the best intentions, but often comes into conflict with Veronica's rich father, Hiram Lodge, and Riverdale High's principal, Waldo Weatherby. As one of the 3 vocalists and the rhythm guitarist of the Archies, Archie performs with Betty and Veronica, Reggie Mantle, who battles him for Veronica's heart, and his best friend, Jughead Jones. The Archies is a garage band where Archie supplies vocals and rhythm guitar, Reggie plays the bass, Veronica plays the keyboard and is another vocalist, Betty is lead guitar, tambourine, and another vocalist, and Jughead plays the drums. Archie founded the group himself, and although not as famous as Josie and the Pussycats, the band plays numerous gigs and has some notoriety. Other spin-off series of the titular character include The Little Archies, published from 1956 to the mid-1990s, which chronicles the adventures of preteen Archie and his friends while in elementary school, and the 2010 revival of the Life with Archie series, which presents 2 alternate parallel storylines, with Archie marrying Veronica in one and Betty in the other. Okay, I'm aware that there's a lot to unpack here. This titular character, as they say, is 8 decades old, more than 8 decades old now, which means that the writers of Riverdale had quite a lot to go on. And what have they done? Nothing, really. I would say the main issue with Archie in the show is that the writers never know what to do with him as far as his storylines and what he's passionate about. Like, season 1, music. Season 2, wrestling. Season 3, boxing. Season 4, running that homeless shelter gym thing. And season 5, who knows? Being a superhero?
It's Superboy and the Invisible
of this, he always gets stuck with the most boring storyline that the fewest people care about. And newsflash to the show, if you're doing this to your main character, you're doing something wrong. Which brings me to the unavoidable point that has to be made in this video, which is that Archie is definitely not the main character of the show Riverdale. The promo pictures and the advertisements present him as such, but he's not. The main storylines that come to a dramatic conclusion at the end of every season do not revolve around him. They revolve around Betty, and they revolve around Jughead. This pattern is so horrible to keep watching, not only because they totally botched Betty and Jughead's characters too, but because Betty and Jughead are not the main characters. At least they're not supposed to be. If the show actually wants to take steps forward in quality and become something that's a little more than just hot garbage, I would suggest a good first step would be to make your main character the main character and not a secondary character. I mean, call me crazy, but that seems like a pretty good first step to me. As far as Archie's actual character goes, there's a lot of flaws in that as well, obviously. He's still quite one-dimensional in a lot of ways. I think part of the reason why the show has inherently made Betty and Jughead their main characters is because, one, I mean, they're the most popular characters for some reason, and two, is that they did really do a terrible job adapting Archie as their main character because they made him really boring. I think that Betty and Jughead were characters that more people could relate to and more people just found more interesting. While Veronica and Cheryl probably weren't the most relatable characters to a lot of people, but they did lead really extravagant, exciting lives that are still entertaining to watch. And that leaves Archie. Hi, Archie. Who really, if you look at him next to all of these other kind of colorful adaptations, at least at the beginning of the series, nobody is that way anymore. But if you look at him next to everybody else in season 1, yeah, he's pretty boring. And that's because they really left all of the most endearing and interesting parts of Archie's character in the comics and did not translate them in the least to the show. In the comics, Archie is a lot more entertaining, and despite the shenanigans and situations that he gets himself in, and despite it being all his fault that he got himself in the situation, he's much easier to root for in the comics because of how entertaining and likable they made him. I think at this point he is the most likable character in the show, but that's mostly because he is the most morally good character in the show, because I kind of hate everybody else in the show at this point, because everybody else is kind of just obsessed with themselves and their own agenda, and Archie actually makes an effort to help other people, which I think is quite refreshing in a dumpster fire that is Riverdale. But even so, that doesn't change the fact that he's not very entertaining, and he's just become kind of a joke at this point, much like all of the other characters in the show. So how I would want his character to be portrayed instead would be, of course, to exhibit the parts of him in the comics that are likable and that are interesting and that are endearing, and apply them to him in the show. So that is making him still good at sports and music and a bit girl crazy, but while also being clumsy and awkward and not sure what to say sometimes, not really super smooth all the time. Like, Archie does not know the exact right thing to say in the exact right moment. That's Jughead's job, and that's Reggie's job for how just witty they are. But Archie's not that way, and I think that they could have had a chance to make him a really relatable character by showing that you can be this, like, popular jock musician, but still not be, like, super smooth with people all the time, or still, you know, being clumsy, you're still making mistakes. And frankly, making mistakes while meaning well is a huge part of Archie's character. So I think that there would be a way to apply that to him in the show while still making him likable and still making him a lot more endearing than they have. I think in the earlier seasons, he probably would be quite a bit more girl crazy, quite a bit more attracted and enamored by every girl that kind of crosses his path, which would make him a pretty nice comedic foil for Jughead, who is obviously attracted to none of them. But then throughout the show, he grows out of this and he would have a very beautiful character arc of being a better boyfriend, person, and hero. I see his character arc being kind of similar to Finn Hudson's from Glee. You know, Finn Hudson, he, like Archie, is a popular football player, but he's also extremely clumsy, which I have personally always found endearing about Finn Hudson. Rest in peace, Corey Monteith, by the way. But I think like Finn, Archie would be kind of figuring himself out in that way in the first couple of seasons as far as what he wants, what he's passionate about, what he wants to do with his life. And again, becoming a much better boyfriend and person and hero of the series. I think in the dynamic of the group, he would definitely be still the most impulsive one. I think he would always have that impulse and that kind of drive to do something without really thinking about it, which could lead to both a lot of funny situations and a lot of serious situations in the show that I'm envisioning for all of these videos. The show I'm envisioning would present Archie as a likable, relatable, heroic, dimensional guy, and I am disappointed in what Riverdale did instead. There's no surprise that Archie cares a lot about his friends. A lot of Archie comics are actually called Archie and Friends, which, you know, solidifies that even more. I feel like all of Archie's substantial friendships only last 1 or 2 seasons. He was friends with Jughead in the first 2 seasons. That's really when the only time when they really hung out. And now, the several seasons that have been happening since then, there's really nothing there anymore. I rather liked his friendship with Monroe in seasons 3 and 4, but they got rid of his character. I hope that his character is doing well after the 7-year time jump. I just gotta say that. I was excited for him when he got into that one college's football program, whatever. And then in season 5, he was friends with Jackson, I think his name was. Which I gotta say, I really liked him too, and I really liked that he was played by an actual amputee. I thought that was really cool representation. But none of these friendships really stuck around for them to really grow into something that the show can see as it's a staple. So here are some friendships that I would have loved to see Archie have throughout the series. And I mean throughout the series, not just for a season. The first one, of course, is Jughead Jones. Jughead has been Archie's best friend ever since childhood. When Jughead first came to Riverdale, he was in a bad mood and tended to dismiss Archie. However, Archie, of good heart, tried to cheer Jughead up, and the two have been inseparable ever since. Jughead often has to help Archie out of sticky situations and usually knows when Archie's ideals will not work, but is powerless to avoid getting involved. I know that I said this in my Jughead video, but I think I would definitely see Archie and Jughead being comedic foils of each other. Archie and Jughead would, without question, be very, very loyal friends to each other. They would get into all kinds of schemes and shenanigans together, which would be a more humorous aspect of the show. Jughead would do his utmost to get Archie out of trouble, but sometimes fail to do so and get in trouble along with Archie. Due to the fact that they're teenage boys and that they're so different, they would hardly get into serious or sentimental conversations with each other, but every so often they would, which would show how much they care about and respect each other. They would always be willing to help each other, lend a hand to each other, and they would surely be best friends. The next close friend that Archie has throughout pretty much the entire span of the comics is, of course, Reggie Mantle. That said, Reggie is Archie's constant romantic and athletic rival. Each often makes attempts to separate the other from Veronica, occasionally exhibiting physical violence, and both have won their fair share of scrapes with each other. Reggie takes every opportunity to play practical jokes on Archie and make cynical wisecracks. However, Reggie is often shown as a companion and friend to Archie, despite his arrogance and competitive nature, and they are both often seen together practicing athletics or pursuing dates.
Because we're frenemies, we like disliking one another. Yes, we're frenemies.
I think that Archie and Reggie should definitely be friends in this show, except I think that there would be always this kind of underlying rivalry between the two of them. And this is something that's pretty common in teen dramas, I think, that there are people who are friends but also kind of competing with each other. I said this in my Reggie video, but I think that it would be funny and interesting if Archie sees it as less of a competition than Reggie does. Like if Reggie tries way harder to outdo Archie than Archie does, it kind of puts them on the same level, and then it just kind of leaves the perpetual question, okay, who's the big man on campus, Archie or Reggie? There would be episodes where this rivalry would be a lot more pronounced and in the forefront, but then there would also be episodes where Archie and Reggie are just tossing a football or shooting baskets together and talking about girls. The next character that I would love to see Archie have a close friendship with is Kevin Keller. I could see Archie in times of confusion or trouble turning to Kevin for advice because Kevin is a lot smarter and has a lot more common sense than Archie. And I already said this in my Kevin Keller video, but I'll say it again. I think that Archie, being the kind soul and just general optimist that he is, I think that Kevin might turn to Archie when he's upset or just needs somebody to talk to. And I think that Archie would be good at making Kevin feel better when he's upset. And I think that Kevin would do the same for Archie. I think that they could have a really, really sweet friendship. And I frankly would love to see it. Archie's other friends include Dilton Doily, the local genius who gets Archie into and out of trouble through his experiments and inventions, Moose Mason, the dim-witted but likable star athlete of Riverdale High and Archie's teammate, Chuck Clayton, another one of Archie's teammates who was originally shy and reclusive but came out of his shell when Archie befriended him, Moose and Chuck's girlfriends, Midge Klump and Nancy Woods, two of the very attractive girls that Archie does not fall for, and Ethel Muggs, a girl with an enormous crush on Jughead. I think that those friendships are, again, small enough that we wouldn't really have to change anything from the comics to the show. And I do plan on making kind of shorter video essays on all of those people and how they all totally got snubbed from the show. So just letting you know that, because that is something that I feel very passionately about as well, is how a lot of the more minor veteran characters from the comics got totally just either scrapped, forgotten about, or snubbed in the show. And I'm thinking, why? So it's gonna come as probably no surprise to you that I think his love interests should be pretty much everyone. The first love interest for him that we're gonna talk about is quite a significant one, and that is Veronica Lodge. Now, as one of the most prominent relationships in the comics, of course I would want Veronica and Archie to date in the show. I just wouldn't want them to last forever. I would want Archie and Veronica to be on and off for roughly the first 2 seasons. After that, they would break up and eventually become friends. It would be made very clear in the show that they would not last outside of high school because their personalities and lifestyles are too different. I've always kind of seen Archie and Veronica's relationship as pretty much a high school relationship because of this. I think that outside of high school, they're just not compatible. And I've talked about that in several of these other videos. But because of how big a deal Archie and Veronica are in the comics, I would still definitely want her to be one of his most significant girlfriends. The second love interest for him, or love interest for him, we're gonna talk about is Cheryl. Now, besides Betty and Veronica, Cheryl Blossom, the wealthy redheaded girl from Pembroke, was brought in as a third love interest for Archie Andrews. At first, she was deemed too sexual and a bit promiscuous, and was taken out of the series, but due to her popularity, she was brought back in Love Showdown, a 4-part miniseries in which Archie attempts to make a decision between Cheryl, Betty, and Veronica. I talked about in my Cheryl video how I think it would be cool if in the show Cheryl would date Archie before she came out. I talked about how it would be clear that Cheryl would not be doing this because she likes Archie, but she'd be doing it to get under Veronica's skin. I think this would have been a cool way to show Cheryl's compulsory heterosexuality, Cheryl and Veronica's ever so present rivalry, and it would be in the earlier seasons, which is when I would want Archie and Veronica to date. And that would obviously be before Cheryl comes out. So it works out perfectly. The next love interest you might not be expecting, but it's Tony Topaz. For this one, I think the moment has kind of passed, but if the time jump didn't happen, I always thought it would be cool if Archie and Tony went to a college either in or near town, and they kind of started developing feelings for each other and dated for like a season. Imagine a little bit into their first year of college, they start getting closer over a few episodes, and Archie then confesses that he's really into Tony, and Tony's reluctant at first because she's still really hung up on Cheryl, but then she realizes that Archie has made her the happiest since she and Cheryl broke up. So then they start dating and they actually fall in love. But it's not like the love, it's like filler couple love, like Brittany and Sam from Glee. The next love interest that I would have liked to see for Archie is Sabrina Spellman. In Archie number 700, which came out in July of 2019 and signified the start of another soft reboot, it is revealed that Archie got into a relationship with Sabrina Spellman over his summer break while everyone was on vacation, after she saved him from a pack of wolves. Now, since Sabrina has not come to Riverdale until now, this moment has kind of passed as well. But I always thought Archie and Sabrina could be a fun summer romance if they were still in high school. All right, coming down to the wire here. I know that Archie has a lot of love interests, and again, that's kind of the point. But the next love interest that I really want to talk about is Valerie Brown. In Archie number 608, which came out May of 2010, Archie began a relationship with Valerie Brown, making her Archie's first girlfriend of African descent. The Archies and Josie and the Pussycats were touring together, and while rehearsing, Archie and Valerie secretly fell in love as they co-wrote the song More Than Words that described their feelings. Issue number 609 revealed that this relationship had seeped into common knowledge by the end of the tour. Archie and Valerie were forced apart when the Pussycats were touring Europe without the Archies, but hoped to keep their relationship going. In the comic Archie Marries Valerie, Valerie is expecting a baby with Archie, whom they name Star. I was greatly disappointed by how short-lived Archie and Valerie were in the show because I really liked them together in the comics. I'm glad that they at least got together in the show because, again, season 1 would actually at times reference the comics. But at the same time, the fact that he dated Josie for a longer time in the show was... I'm actually going to be honest and say that Valerie is my second favorite love interest of Archie's in the comics, and she would be the one that I would want him to end up with if he didn't end up with Betty Cooper. Of course, I had to bring down the house with the person who I believe that Archie belongs with and should end up with. Betty and Archie have been best friends and love interests all their lives. When Veronica Lodge moved to Riverdale, she started competing with her for his affection. I think an interesting thing with Betty and Archie in the early seasons of the show is that Archie never really explicitly said that he doesn't want to be with Betty. He's said,
"Of course I love you, Betty. I've never been good enough for you. I'll never be good enough for you."
When I think, Archie, of where I feel safest and most myself, I think of us in a booth at Pops.
Me too. I kissed her, and I asked her to marry me. A little part of me always thought
We're both
So lucky. Like, you liked Betty.
I do. I always will.
He has never said to her, I don't want to be with you, I don't like you. I think in the earlier seasons, well, he was enamored with Veronica, I'm not going to deny that, but I also think that in the earlier seasons, he simultaneously knew that he couldn't be the man that he knew that Betty deserved. That being said, let's talk a little bit about the arc that I'd love to see them go throughout this series. Betty always, I think, in the back of her head knows that she belongs with Archie. And I think at the beginning of the series, again, I would want Archie to be with Veronica for a majority of the beginning of the series, along with other love interests spattered throughout the rest of the series. I think a beautiful character arc for Archie and Betty would be that if at the beginning of the series, they aren't really ready to be together, that Archie is obviously still figuring things out, Betty's still figuring things out. They are really good friends, and they always care about, confide in, and have the utmost respect for each other. But I think that they would both need to do some maturing and growing up and work on themselves before getting together for good. I think Archie would gradually realize throughout the series that it has always been Betty and that he does want to be with Betty for the long run. And I think with Betty at the beginning of the series, she would know that she wants to be with Archie, but she matures in the fact that she doesn't think that Archie wants to be with her, so she has to press on. And isn't just a simp for him, waiting for him the entire series. Because that's not a great arc for her. I think that a beautiful arc for Betty, which I already talked about in my Betty video, would be to, see how she is on her own and with other people and learning how to relax around Archie and to just be his friend. And like so many great love stories for the ages, they would eventually find their way back to one another. I like what Michael Scott says in the end of season 5 of The Office about him and Holly, and that is that I think that we're one of those couples with a long story. I will see her every now and again, and maybe one year she'll be with somebody and the next year I'll be with somebody, and it'll take a long time, and then it's perfect. I think that can definitely be applied to Betty and Archie. I could also see at the end of the series, Archie having a heart-to-heart with Jughead, similar to Jim's heart-to-heart with Dwight at the end of The Office, or Schmidt's heart-to-heart with Nick at the end of New Girl season 6. But he would be having a heart-to-heart with Jughead, and Jughead would say, "You love Betty, Archie. I think you always have." And then Archie runs to find Betty and they live happily ever after. Woo! So there you have it. That is my Archie Andrews character essay. Of course, this character has existed for over 80 years, so I couldn't talk about every single iteration of him, every single version of him from all of the comics. So if you have any questions about what else I would like to see from Archie, as far as his character arc, his friendships, his relationships, anything else, feel free to comment them down below. I would be more than happy to answer those. Archie, like every other character in this dumpster fire of a show, deserved better. So talk to me about Archie, because he is the main character that deserved better. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you like this video, please do not forget to like it and subscribe to my channel. It really, really helps me out, so it would mean so much to me if you would do that. Click the notification bell to be notified when I post. I hope that you have a wonderful, amazing day, and thank you so much for watching again. Bye! This is the thing about... I don't know why I'm laughing. Blech.